Chewy, airy, and shatteringly crispy. That is the best focaccia in all of Italy, and I'm just gonna say it, in all of the world. I went to Bari, Italy, which is in Puglia, the heel of the Italian boot, and I went to a shop, Panificio Fiore. They have been declared as having the best focaccia in all of Italy, so I went there to learn it. It blew my mind because it is completely different from any other focaccia I've ever tasted or ever seen made. And there's some really key differences that comes down to the amount of water they use, the amount of time that they let it rise, which is like forever, and the amount of olive oil they use when making it. It is phenomenal. The best part of this focaccia is that it's so easy to make, and there's really nothing unusual about the ingredients themselves. It's really just the time and the volume. What we have here is 3.5 cups of bread flour, and we're gonna add some yeast, about 5 teaspoons, and just a little bit of sugar to help the yeast along. And we're gonna just mix it on low for just a few seconds just to stir everything together. Now we're gonna add some cool room temperature water, and we're gonna slowly increase the speed to about medium, and we're gonna let it go for about 5 minutes or so until we have a nice, very wet, very smooth dough. So the kitchen at Panificio Fiore, it's a bit of a visceral experience. You've got this massive oven heating the space. You have trash cans of dough fermenting away all around you. And you literally have these pans all over the place, underfoot, on shelves, on tables, with focaccia dough literally being poured into them. It's an intense place to see focaccia made. Now, while that is mixing, you're going to oil the bowl in which it will rise, and we're just going to put about 2 tablespoons of olive oil into our bowl. Now look at how wet this dough is, and this is the magic of their recipe. A typical focaccia recipe is about 56% hydration, but at Panificio Fiore, they go up as much as like 90%. And that water really matters because a really wet dough has much weaker gluten, and that's going to give you the chewier crumb that we're going to get in the finished dish. Now, all we're going to do is cover our bowl, and we let it sit for about 10 minutes. The big reveal. Actually, nothing's changed. But we've let it rest for about 10 minutes, and now we're going to add a teaspoon of salt, and we're going to knead it again for about 5 minutes or so until it's nice and smooth and elastic. All right, perfect. Now, as you can tell, this is still a very wet, sticky dough, and that's the idea. Now, I am just spreading my oil back around my bowl again, and in the process, coating my spatula with some oil, because this is, like I said, a very wet, sticky dough. Just as important as our water volume is our rising time. The typical focaccia recipe will call for anywhere between 1 and 2 hours of rising time. At Panificio Fiore, they let it rise for 4 hours. And during that time, the dough doubles in size, and then it collapses in on itself, and then it rises again. This is really key to the finished texture. We let ours go for closer to 6 hours, and there's a really important reason for that. In Panificio Fiore, they had this monster wood-fired stove that kept the kitchen area really warm. So their dough rose very quickly, very big. Our kitchen isn't quite that warm, and I suspect neither is yours, so we're gonna let it go a little bit longer to get the same effect. Once your dough is in your bowl, take your fingers, dip them in the oil, and we're just gonna dab the oil all over our dough. And then we're going to wrap this tightly in plastic wrap. 5 to 6 hours later, we have a very jiggly dough. Now we're going to transfer it to our pan. But first we have to prep the pan. Now, you can hate me if you like, but we're going to first coat the pan and our spatula with cooking spray. Why do we do that? Because we're already using so much olive oil. Well, it's because this dough is so sticky that if you miss even one little spot on the dough or on the pan, it's gonna stick. And you really don't want that. So, just give it a good coating, spin it around, spray it up really good. Okay, now we are going to add more olive oil, of course, about good 2 tablespoons. Get it in there. And trust me, at Panificio Fiore, they do not measure, and they use way more than 2 tablespoons. So just gonna slosh that around. Oh yeah. Again, that's gonna be what gives us our crispy bottom. Crispy bottom. Now we're gonna take our dough with our oiled spatula, and we're going to ease it. We are not dumping, we are easing it into our pan because we do not want to deflate it. We want that airy texture to be preserved. And the more you maneuver the dough, the more you poke it and prod it, you're going to knock more of that air out. So just kind of let it just ooze its way into the pan. And at this point, you definitely do not want to try to force it into the corners. You're gonna let it just kind of take its own time. You know, imagine this is one of those horror movies with the blob that has its own mind. Just let it do what it wants. It's gonna get there eventually. And don't ever throw any of that olive oil away. Jiggle it a little bit to help it along. Now you're going to set it aside because we're going to prepare our toppings. Because at Panificio Fiore, they do dozens of different toppings on their focaccia, but the absolute most popular and the absolute most amazing is cherry tomatoes and green olives, and that's what we're going to do. We don't want to water down our dough on top. We want all that moisture inside. So when we are preparing our cherry tomatoes, we're just going to lightly smush them just a little bit with a potato masher. And the goal here is just to kind of smush out some of the seeds and the liquid. Now, we have some pitted green olives that we've halved. We're going to take our focaccia dough and we're going to start putting our olives into our dough. You can arrange them any way you like. Gently press them in. Again, you don't want to deflate your dough. You just want to embed your olives into it. The best olives for this are Castelvetrano, which are pretty common. You should be able to find them, but use whatever olives you got. I'm not a big fan of olive pitters. You can use them if you want, but a real Italian cook would just use the side of a chef's knife and just smush them and pull the pits out. I find the pitters are kind of slow and tedious to use. And always one for the cook. Okay, now we're gonna do the same thing with our tomatoes, but we're gonna use our fingers to drain away the seeds and any juices. If you're smart, you're not gonna throw those down the drain. You could add them to a soup or a stew, or if you're really smart, you're gonna turn them into a Bloody Mary. When you pick the tomatoes up, don't be afraid to just give them a little bit of squeeze, just again, to extract any of those juices and seeds. This is more art than science, so don't fuss too much here. And in the process of doing this, by the way, as we're gently pressing these into the dough, we're also helping it ooze into the corners. Now, you see that two of my corners are still a little exposed, so we're just gonna gently, with our fingers, nudge the dough in, and look at all that olive oil. That's amazing. Now, we're gonna let this sit for about 20 minutes at room temperature while the oven heats to 500 degrees. It's been 20 minutes, and you can see our dough is very happy, bubbling up. Obviously, there's not nearly enough olive oil on this, so we're gonna put another 4 tablespoons on the top. The key here is to make sure that you get the tomatoes with another hit of olive oil, because that's gonna keep them from scorching in the oven, because we are putting this in a 500-degree oven. Is that enough oil? I don't think so. Can never have enough olive oil. There we go. There we go. All right, that's probably good. Now we're going to take some dried oregano. We're going to sprinkle that on the top. Get it nice and even. And then some salt and pepper. Make sure you're using freshly cracked and really coarse black pepper. Extra bit of punch of flavor and texture. There we go. All right, so now this is gonna go into a 500-degree oven for about 20 to 22 minutes. What you're looking for is the sides to be golden crisp from all that olive oil and slightly pulling away from the sides. If you have one, use a baking steel or a stone. So we popped it out of the oven. We put the pan on a wire rack to cool for 5 minutes, and then we used a spatula to pull focaccia out of the pan and let it cool for another 30 minutes on the rack. Now we're ready to dig in. We're going to transfer it to our cutting board. I gotta be honest with you, I'm not allowed to make this at home anymore because when I do, my husband and I eat the entire thing in a day. This is just dangerous. Italy's best, the world's best, Milk Street's best focaccia. Look at this crackly bottom. The inside is so airy and chewy. The top is wonderfully briny and sweet from the tomatoes and the olives. It is just a thing of wonder. Again, all that water, all that time, and all that olive oil come together to just make the perfect and frankly, really easy focaccia. You just gotta give it some time. So if you want the world's best focaccia, check out our new book, Milk Street Backroads Italy. Not only does it have hundreds of just like amazing recipes that we traveled all over Italy to get, but we have the stories and the photos of the people who taught us, and it's just an amazing book.